Today we're talking about your new documentary, It's So Easy and Other Lies, which hits theaters June 3rd, and tells the story of Duff McKagan, the bass player for Guns N' Roses, and his battle with alcohol and drug addiction at the peak of the band's fame. How did you become involved with the film?
Duff and I met, actually we were neighbors, and we met walking our kids to school. You know, he wrote the book, and he asked me if I would read it, and of course I did, and you know, it spoke to me. I relate. We're about the same age, and I related a lot to, you know, his story, and I felt like, you know, one of those inspirational stories that as a filmmaker, you know, I just think those kinds of stories are the ones I want to tell, and so, you know, I asked him if he'd be interested in making a documentary about it, and at first he said no, and he probably said no to me half a dozen times. But I just persisted because I just think it's one of those stories it's a phenomenal story. So he finally agreed when the book became a New York bestseller, and when it was being released on paperback, he called me and said, hey, you know, if we're going to do this, why don't you start coming with me? I'm doing the press junket for the paperback release. So I started going with him and shooting, and we didn't really even know what we were going to do yet, but I was just like, you know, it was really just kind of opening it up finally that he was, you know, opening up to actually doing it. But so the more time we spent, then we started to figure out like what the movie was going to be about, how we were going to make it, and what he wanted it, what messages he wanted more to be in it, all that kind of stuff. So, but the pinnacle of how we came up with the end result was when Guns was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he asked me to go with him to Cleveland to shoot some stuff, and of course I went. So of course I did. I went and I went to the House of Blues, and I remember, you know, just shooting B-roll of the show, and I was blown away by this book reading show and just how the audience reacted. It was, you know, it was a sold out show, and it was standing room only, and then I started shooting the people watching, the audience watching the show, and that was really it really resonated with me how people responded and how they just watched the show and were in awe of Duff and what he was doing. And then having that particular show, you know, he had his band loaded, was behind him, you know, he's sitting on a stool reading from his book, and the band was like scoring it. And I just thought it was really cool and unique and different. So when we got back to LA, I pitched him on the idea of like, look, why don't we use the book reading show as sort of the catalyst or the device to drive the storytelling of you know, of your narrative. And he loved that idea. And then so, you know, of course we went ahead and put together this, you know, a bigger version of this book reading show. And we of course wanted to shoot it in Seattle where he grew up, and he suggested this great old theater, the Moore Theater in Seattle. And so anyway, that's kind of how that came about. And then, you know, of course, I wanted to make the show grander for the movie. And so, you know, Duff got a string quartet, and I had like 12 cameras, and I had a steady cam and a crane and all, you know, cameras everywhere. And it was just real special. And I think, you know, and Duff and I always wanted to make this movie different and stand out and not be just you know, sort of a self-indulgent fluff piece about Duff. And a lot of the people at the beginning, the distributors and some other executive producers and people really wanted to push us into this being more of a Guns N' Roses doc. And, you know, that's not what we were out to accomplish at all with this movie. It's, you know, of course Guns N' Roses is a big part of his life, and that is definitely, you know, I'm sure you watched the movie, but it was, you know, it's not his whole story. You know, his whole story is what is great. And I mean, Guns N' Roses would be a great documentary. I would love to make that documentary too, but that's not what we were set out to accomplish here. And anyway, I think we did accomplish what we set out to do, and was to be an uplifting view, and Duff, you know, for Duff to pull the curtain back enough for people to see, you know, not only the good stuff in his life, but really the dark side, and to, you know, Duff really wants to help people and inspire people to overcome addiction with success. I wanted to capture that in this movie.
Well, you talked there just a few moments ago about him doing reading from his book with music playing in the background, and it actually reminded me of Jeff Wayne's 1978 musical version of The War of the World. It's used progressive rock and a string orchestra which played constantly in the background while Richard Burton narrated the entire story. And while Duff was reading aloud parts of his autobiography on stage, his band was playing constantly in the background as well. Was that deliberate, or was it just coincidence?
No, that's how it was intended. I mean, it was, it made it difficult, like in editing, by the way, technically, because the music is baked into his reading. So it was tricky when we got into editing, and I didn't realize it, because when you do a concert movie, it's like the concert, and there's but this was unique in that he's reading and there's music playing. So if we wanted to edit out anything he was saying, then we had to edit the music into that too. It was kind of a little bit of a Rubik's Cube at times, where the editor it took a lot longer to edit that part of the movie because of that, and that was something that, when none of us really realized while when we shot it and whenever. Although I did think ahead, and we had the theater for 3 days. One was load-in and sort of rehearsal day, but the first day of shooting the show, we had no audience, and we did all the music separate from Duff, and then we did Duff reading with the music. So we had it separated, but it was a good thought, but it really didn't help that much because, again, it's like when he was reading, it was baked in with the music. So it was interesting. It was an interesting, technical achievement, I think, in a way, because of that. But I think it makes it unique and different as far as documentaries go, because it is unorthodox in that way with the book reading show. But as a filmmaker, I thought it was a great tool and device to push the storytelling around, and to go into different chapters of his life. It was a really useful technique, I thought.
I noticed that you guys interspersed a lot of archival footage into the film. There must have been a lot of that footage. How long did that take?
Well, okay, so here's the deal with that. Exclusive rights to all this footage that this guy Mark Cantor shot. And Mark Cantor was Slash's childhood best friend growing up. And when Guns N' Roses got together and they first started playing, they basically handed him a VHS camcorder and said, and a still camera, and said, "You're our photographer." He was just with them all the time anyway, because he was Slash's best friend. So, and his family owns Cantor's Deli, which is a famous deli in L.A. And they used to hang out at the deli because they didn't have any money, and that's where they ate most of their meals, was at the deli.
Right.
So Mark shot their first 50 shows in L.A. with this VHS camcorder, and he's been sitting on this footage for however many years, 25 years now or whatever, and nobody's really seen this footage. So Duff's, anyway, I contacted him, and he was like, "Yeah, you can use any of it." He goes, "I've been waiting for this day for somebody to use this footage," and he was thanking me for actually, coming to him. So it was like a gift from God. I can't even tell you. We could make a whole movie just around that footage. And so I had to be really selective. There was over 50 hours of footage. So we had to be really selective of what footage we wanted that we could use or would use. But it had to. I didn't want to, and Duff didn't either. We didn't want to just use that footage gratuitously and just overuse it, and for what reason? We wanted to use it specifically for the storytelling and not abuse that privilege. So unfortunately, we only used what we did. Like I said, I had 50 hours of footage, and then also Duff would give me. We were up at his house in Seattle, and he was digging around in his garage, and he pulled this box out, and it had another 50 VHS tapes in. He was like, "Here, you can go through this stuff." He goes, "I don't even know what's on here, but you can use anything that's interesting." We had all this footage. It was it took weeks to just go through this footage, and there's definitely some gems in there that we couldn't use, but it was interesting. That was an interesting process. That might have been the coolest part of the whole thing, was going through all those shows. They had this chemistry that was just undeniable. I mean, they from the first chord on till through their whole careers. I mean, those guys. How many? 5 guys were meant to be together. It was one of those and Slash says that in the movie. He was like, it was one of those meant to be things,
Well, I read that back in 2012 when it was first announced that It's So Easy and Other Lies would be turned into an autobiographical documentary, that musical artists such as Mick Jagger, Elton John, and even Arnold Schwarzenegger had already been interviewed, but I didn't see them in the final cut.
No, that was all rumors. That was one of the sort of salesmen of the movie was trying to get. That was supposed to be for internal use of like, hey, let's put together a wish list of people that would be fun to have in the movie, kind of a list that was before we even started shooting anything, and it leaked out somehow. I don't know, one of the executive producers thought it was, I don't know. Yeah, would it have been great to have Mick Jagger in the movie? Yeah, but did it, would it really have made sense with the stories that we were telling in the movie? I don't know, maybe. I think one of the reasons he was on the list anyway was that, Guns N' Roses, when they first broke, they opened for the Stones here in L.A. for a couple shows, and I remember Duff telling me a story about backstage. He asked Mick Jagger, why do you guys play these same songs over and over and over again? And he said, Mick just looked at him and said, because we don't play the songs for us, we play the songs for them. That resonated with him. He said he felt really stupid after that, asking him that question. But there's so many people, so many stories that aren't in the movie, aren't even in the book. But of course, I would have loved to have gotten all those people, but it didn't. That's not. It didn't happen that way. And it's hard. It's hard with these people, with these rock stars, that scheduling and this and that. I mean, Duff was, he's back with Guns N' Roses now, but while we were making the movie, he was in like 5 different bands. He would constantly go on tour, and we'd have to shut down for a month until he got back, and so it was, it made it difficult in that respect, like scheduling things, and I didn't get Slash in the movie till like the last minute. It was almost like I had to deliver the movie like December 31st, and I interviewed him December 12th.
You've directed 4 films to date, a short, a feature, and 2 documentaries, this being the first one. How was it for you going from conventional narrative storytelling to documentaries?
Well, it's really a different beast. It's very challenging. I mean, I was telling somebody else, another interviewer, it's like, a narrative, good documentaries made by good documentary filmmakers makes it look easy. And then you go, oh, well, documentaries looks like it would be way easier to make than a narrative. But I got to tell you, from doing both now, I would say, for me, the narrative is easier because you have a script. You have you have 100 pages. You're shooting those 100 pages, and you can have your ADs and everybody break it down. And you're like, this. We have 4 weeks to shoot this, so you know exactly what you're doing every single day for those 4 weeks, and then you have, you shot the movie, and then you go into editing, and you have whatever 12 weeks to edit the movie or whatever whatever budget you can work with and time-wise. But documentaries are like, I mean, when Duff and I first set out to do this, if he would have told me, Chris, this is going to take you 3 years to do this, I would have been like, oh, dude, I don't know, man. So, documentaries are tricky because they're real. You have to go in with an open mind, and you have to go in knowing, you have to be able to be spontaneous and organic, and it's hard to be artistic when things are coming at you at different times and over a span of a long period of time. And so I hope that answers your question, but I enjoy both. I just think documentaries take longer, and especially when you're doing music documentaries, one big lesson I learned from this doc was about music licensing, and that is a really challenging thing to we have something like 32 songs in the movie, and you have to license every single one of those songs, and it's a lot of time and a lot of effort and you're dealing with record labels and blah blah blah. I have enjoyed doing both though.
Right. Yeah, I've done a little of both, and I think for me I prefer the narratives because, like you said, documentaries are that much more difficult and more time consuming. Okay, well, folks, today I was speaking with Christopher Duddy, the writer and director of the new documentary It's So Easy and Other Lies, which hits theaters June 3rd from Accelerator Media and Vision Films, and talks about Duff McKagan, the bass player for Guns N' Roses, and his battle with alcohol and drug addiction. Christopher, thanks so much for your time, and I wish you the best of luck with the film's upcoming release.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.